All right. Let's see here. Make sure our audio is working. Testing. We're good. Perfect. All right. Well, welcome to yet another My Business World Live. I am your host, Billy Bush, as usual. And once again, I am not joined by Brandon. He is enjoying himself in another part of the state or potentially other state. Not entirely sure, but he is off today, having a good time, keeping that whole work-life balance thing up, or whatever it is that mythical unicorn that they talk about. So today we are going to dive into a few things. First of all, if you do have any questions, comments, concerns, or anything else, I would love to hear in the comments. You feel free to ask any questions. Part of this is definitely to do some Q&A, to explore kind of ask me anything style. Like if you have a challenge that you've been facing or wanted kind of our feedback on something, happy to dive into that a little bit. And even if you're not watching this live, feel free to do the same in the comments because we will be monitoring the comments as well after the fact, and would love to engage and kind of continue that conversation. And a lot of the time, that is fodder for next week's episode. So just keep that in mind. But today I wanted to talk about a couple of questions and items that have come up this week and some things that are happening. I mean, right now continues to be a very interesting time, albeit interesting is a highly nebulous adjective to choose there, but it's a very interesting time in our country. 2020, the Mulligan year, as I've been calling it for a while now, continues to add interesting things to the mix, as we say. And part of that is this question of where does business stand today, and what is it that we need to be doing? I mean, a question came up, and even Brandon, I believe, did a podcast episode recently just talking about taking a stand and what that means in your business for things that are important to you. And it kind of comes down to a challenge that a couple of clients were facing this week and that we've been discussing, which is around a little bit of clarity on your mission, vision, and your purpose, your company purpose, and what that really means. And where is it that you ought to take stands, and where maybe you can step back. The first thing that, as we were talking about this, the first point that we came across, of course, is that the business needs to be in alignment with you. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to stand for all of your values and literally be some sort of perfect reflection of you and your beliefs and your you name it. But obviously, it needs to be in alignment in some way. It cannot be out of alignment. It cannot be against the grain. Or if it is, it's going to create lots of problems for you. And there's going to be lots of inconsistencies in your life that might be a bit tricky to navigate. So, that's kind of the obvious point is, well, if you are the owner, of course the business should be in at least some level of alignment with you. Now, what I mean by it doesn't need to reflect you perfectly is if you have a social cause that's really important to you, the business doesn't need to also have that cause. But at the same time, it can't do things out of alignment with that cause. It can't do things that would go against that cause. It needs to, of course, kind of get out of the way if that's the case, and focus on what the business does. And when we were talking about mission, vision, values, it is about defining the business's personality and what the business is. And so often, we don't separate these things, at least in the small business realm. Of course, when you get to bigger companies or you go public or you name it, the business kind of takes on a life of its own. But even at a smaller level, starting to define the business so it's not just this nebulous blob or this highly commoditized industry representative. I often give the example with we work with a lot of health practitioners, and so I've seen the signs on the roadway for a chiropractic office that literally just says chiropractor. There's no brand sign, no nothing along with it. It just says chiropractor. And I get it because they're like, well, if you're looking for a chiropractor, you know where to find one. If it's too cutesy of a brand and you're not even sure what they do, that's also a problem. But I don't know that there's a better way to commoditize yourself than to basically have zero brand and just have a sign that says chiropractor. And that's, one of the struggles is so many business owners treat their business as some sort of representative commodity of their industry, as opposed to having its own kind of, essence a little bit, its own personality, if you will. It brought up an interesting question for the business owner, though. He was kind of a no fluff kind of guy, and he didn't like, or at least it kind of went against his thoughts of like, well, do I need to come up with some deep, passionate, mission and this really high level, like we're going to save the world and world peace and whatever it is, and that's not the case. But what it is, and that's something that we started to kind of go through. It isn't. Not every business's mission and purpose needs to be some sort of earth-shattering, peace on earth level mission, right? Many businesses, in fact, some of the most successful businesses, have an extremely simple mission. And I've talked about this in the past a little bit, but it's a mission that they kind of live by, and it starts to define them. An example I've given is talking about burger joints. And there are a couple of burger joints, and you can probably think of them. If I say something like provide the best, just typical burger, the best, simplest burger you can possibly find, you've probably got an idea in your head of what that might be. And there might be more than one that kind of fit that definition, frankly. They could be fighting for it a little bit. But there's definitely regions of the country where everyone will be like, oh, man, Shake Shack, that's what I meant. A Shake Shack all the way. Or In-N-Out burger, hands down. You recognize that they're holding to an ethos that is much bigger than just being a burger joint, because there's 1,000 burger joints, local ones, major chains, you name it. There's plenty that are out there. So why is it that you're so interested in Shake Shack? They obviously have an ethos that's a bit bigger, a bit more tuned than just a typical burger place, and that's something that your business ought to have. When you start to recognize this, it starts to empower you in the actions you take. It starts to take away the paralysis of and the overwhelm, because it starts to clean up the mess of business. Meaning you have 1,000 directions you could go. You have 1,000 strategies you could explore, 1,000 ways to market, 1,000 people you could hire, 1,000 anything. And without some sort of definition, without some sort of guide rail in understanding who you are, who you serve, what you're really about as a company, you're just looking at 1,000 options. But the instant you say, we're going to provide the best burger and focus on the burger and quality of the burger, it cuts out half of those decisions. Immediately, you're like, well, we don't need to add all these random products. We don't need to do this. We don't need to market that way. Immediately just cleans up half of the mess because you've got a definition. And it gives an outline and definition for your customer. Instead of being the nebulous blob commoditized burger joint, now when they start thinking, I could go for just a really, really good burger, they know where to go, because you've been talking about that, you've been doing that, you've been succeeding in that. And that is what your understanding your core is really about. It's not about always trying to connect at some higher level and just change the world type mission and vision. Now, some companies might have more of that, and you get these like social benefit companies, and nonprofits that have a really kind of altruistic level mission and vision, but it's not about the fluff. It's really just about understanding who you are as a company, and what does that mean for anything else you do. Clients occasionally will ask us, well, I've got this situation, say they'll pose a question. Well, what marketing should I do? Or what should I add products? Should I hire? What should I do? And if I don't know the company really well, if we haven't been working together for a while, my first question, of course, is like, well, I don't know. Who are you? Like, there's more than one way to do it right, and both ways might even be right given the right context. So who are you? Let me understand who you are. Who is it that you're serving? What is it you're trying to do? Should I market on Facebook? Well, I don't know. Are your customers on Facebook? If they're not on Facebook at all, maybe it's not as important. But you got to know who your customer is. You got to understand that and why they're your customer. There's a reason that they go to you, and starting to get some clarity there starts to clean up the questions that you need to answer around your marketing strategies, your expansion strategies, your team development strategies, you name it. It starts to bring clarity to the rest of the strategic landscape, and that is the beauty of focusing on your core as a company. And so it's really interesting, and you don't need to get, as I mentioned, you don't need to get sucked into thinking that it needs to be way bigger, it's not like, again, some sort of like religious level, altruistic mission. It's just a focus. It's just delivering, the best in some area, really focusing to be to be different, to serve a particular need, you name it. And starting to define those things is really a first step for any company. Anyone we work with, generally, that's where we're going to start. Even if, I mean, unless the house is burning down, we'll try to put out the fire. But beyond that, we're going to then kind of step back and start talking about the foundation again. And because without understanding there, it's misguided to start giving any other advice. It's misguided to say, well, yeah, of course you should be on Facebook or you should be on whatever, or there's just so much more to it than that, and it all comes back to this understanding of your core. And that's I've been getting this question a lot this week, and even talking about it in current events. Again, you don't have to take your business to that level and have it be a social justice kind of element. If there's some component of it that serves that purpose and that's right for you and your audience and who you're serving and everything else, I mean, it's not that it's impossible, but I recognize that you don't need to go that route, and recognize that a mission doesn't need to be that just over the top, if that's the right wording for it. So a couple of thoughts on this. So as I was talking to these clients, this one client in particular I'll use as my example so I can think through it in my head here. We started to talk about that, like, well, I mean, my goal is to make money. Like, okay, well, that's good. I mean, that's fine. As a business owner, I would hope so that you want to. I mean, frankly, if you don't, then you're not going to be around very long. So even if you're doing a fantastic job, I want you to stick around. So you need to make money. That's great. But why else do you do it? Why do you do the work that you do as an owner? Why did you start the business in the first place? Why, if you've been at it for a while, what on earth has kept you at it? Because there's a lot of ways to make money. So what on earth has kept you at it? And what is that? And what does that look like? Answer that question as a starting point, and it starts to come out. It's not always super obvious. You might be like, well, I fell into it because it was a job I had in high school, and I just kind of rang up the ladder. Well, what happened? Did you ever leave? Did you ever try anything else? In this case, it was like, yeah, I went and tried a couple of things, but I came back to this because I liked it. And it's like immediately, well, why did you like it? What was it about the business that you liked? And you're starting to tune in there. And then the next question, the next side of the discussion comes in. Okay, so you have a customer, right? Why does your customer choose to use you over somebody else? What is the reason that any of your customers today, they could choose somebody else? Why do they stick with you? And it starts to come out a little bit more. Oh, we really deliver. We were able to get solve problems that other companies aren't able to solve, or whatever it might be. And we just started to tune into that. And it's like, okay, well, perfect. We're starting to understand there's a mission here. The reality is every business already has a mission. It just might not be a very good one, and it might be unspoken, and it might be by accident. But there's something that's keeping people there, and there's something that's keeping customers around, and it might not be exactly what you want it to be. So you're starting to hone in there on, like, well, the elements of it that exist. There's reasons that somebody chooses you over someone else that already exists today, even if you haven't defined it. There's reasons you choose to work there and to be in that industry versus another one. And, even if you haven't defined it. So a lot of these things are there. It's just a matter of uncovering them and understanding them more fully. What is it about your business that other people, why do they keep coming, right? And when you start to define those things, we recognize, in this particular client, that there was a technical prowess and ability to solve the most difficult of problems in their space for their clients. That's what people were there for. And we talked about other things like, well, competitors do a lot of this. We don't really do that. It was perfect because we were starting to understand this is how you're different. Your competitors do that. You don't do it. It doesn't, none of these things are like right or wrong. It's just a different take. And somebody that really wants this technical prowess and really wants this surety of problem solutions, they're going to go there, where maybe somewhere else they get a little bit more of the white glove treatment and they prefer that. They don't mind, they don't have a lot of difficult problems to solve, so they don't need to go to this other place, whatever it might be. They go to the other guy. That's fine. We're just defining our market. We're understanding who we're serving and the job that we are hired to do. If you're familiar at all with Jobs to Be Done, it's my little allusion to that. Highly recommend books like Clayton Christensen's latest book. But rest in peace. That's definitely a crazy thing to even think about nowadays. But he wrote a book. What is it? Something Luck. I can't even remember. But it's a fantastic book. Competing Against Luck. I think that was his last book, and it really talks a lot about this. But he introduced this idea of jobs to be done in his earliest works, even Innovator's Dilemma and things like that. But regardless, this whole idea of just recognizing the job that your product, service, or company is hired to do is really critical to understanding kind of your core, like what is your mission and such. And we defined a mission. It was to be that problem solver that can deliver a confidence in finding a solution that you can't find anywhere else in their space. And I'm obviously being very nebulous, but you can see how this applies to lots of industries, right? I'm not getting into the specifics there. And we just immediately, just answering a few questions, we're immediately able to start defining this mission, and even commented like, "Wow, this is really ringing true," And it's like, well, yeah, because that's what's there. This is what you're doing now. You have this stuff; it's in there, and immediately it was like, well, how should we market? How should we? All these other things. There's ideas come about, like how you could market, even the messaging that you would put out there. All sorts of stuff starts to be laid out when you understand that core a bit more, and it makes a lot of those decisions for you, right? And it gives confidence too. It's like all of a sudden there's an extra passion and confidence in the work that he was already doing, because now he feels like there's a mission to be accomplished, and there's kind of what is the word there? A reputation to uphold, of the strengths that they had. And it wasn't to say that they're like perfect in all regards, right? But you're looking at those key strengths. In fact, that's often a great question. It's like, in spite of all of our weaknesses, why the heck do customers still come? Whatever those things are, they must be pretty darn good, because if they're willing to come for all the other issues we've got. But that's one of the interesting things is just defining those things. It instills passion. And now the hiring process becomes clearer, because it's like we can now talk about this in the hiring process and recognizing that there's going to be some challenges. You're going to have to face problems that other people wouldn't normally have to face, because our role is to be this level of expert and solve the unsolvable. So are you ready for that? Are you willing to take on those things? Are you humble enough to admit when you're wrong so that you can get help from the rest of the team? Because our goal overall has to be to solve that problem, not worry about how we look. And doing these types of things, it's like it started to just define a company and define a hiring process and define so much more. Really powerful, really interesting stuff that we were able to get into. But the whole point there is just that it's understanding a couple of those elements will support so much more, and help you say no to the right things, help you say yes to the right things, or no to the wrong things, yes to the right things, and just give you some focus and kind of cut out all of the overwhelm, or at least some of it. Something really interesting, and just the essence of it there is just to recognize that the exercises around and exploring your core and kind of the personality of the business, and if we say mission, vision, values, don't let the buzzwordiness of that block out the reality that understanding who the business is so powerful. And you don't have to be some sort of pie in the sky level, peace on earth type, mission bringer. You don't have to define it as that. That it is delivering something that is different, that is solving a real problem in the space, and understanding that is going to bring some clarity. So that was one of the first points that we, or just one of the points that I've had several discussions this week on, and wanted to kind of connect the dots a little bit for any of you that might be discovering or thinking, why do I need to dig into this kind of mission, vision, values kind of stuff? Because I've got all these other problems. I got this marketing issue. I got this team member problem. I got this, you name it. Yeah, the solutions are so much better when they're rooted in that core understanding. So if we are able to, if it's a fire we need to put out, the house is burning down around us, we don't want to die in the fire, put the fire out and talk about solutions there. But as soon as we can do that, it's a matter of rebuilding from the foundation up. Because the foundation, if it's on a weak foundation, our solutions in the future will always be weak. And that's one of the keys, that we've been digging on for some time, and has just come up with several conversations this week. So beyond that, a couple other things that I had questions on in the news. There are, we're seeing lots of companies cropping up, taking advantage of the opportunities that are yielded in a market like this. So I think we're officially in a recession now, albeit I think it's a very unusual recession. I think it's going to do some interesting things where it will bounce back pretty rapidly, maybe not in full force, so we won't be up to 100%. Say we have a 50% bounce back, arbitrary numbers, by the way, and then we'll have a longer climb out of the remainder, which is kind of the long-term damage that needs to be repaired. And I see that kind of being the process that we're going to likely go through, especially with how much stimulus and everything else. I don't know the long-term ramifications of any of that when we get into, that's getting into a whole other questionable, like, economic mess when we just trillions of dollars floating around, and all sorts of question marks that I have. My economist senses are in disarray when it comes to hearing about some of those things. But regardless, as far as solving the immediate, likelihood there is that we do cover up some of the pain. We got a good solid painkiller there. Maybe not solving the long-term root cause problems, but a good solid painkiller in some of that stimulus. But really being able to help things recover. But there are several companies coming out of this. I've seen several like mask companies coming out with all these really interesting masks. And I wonder like how important are these companies, or like are they going to be able to stick around? Is the demand for masks going to continue like long into the future? Or is that one of these like just hit it while it's hot and get out kind of situations? I don't know. It's an interesting thing. So I mean, what was one company that we came across? HM Care, yeah, they've raised money for these special masks. I mean, there's even investors throwing money at some of this kind of stuff. So it's really interesting. It'll be interesting to see how some of these things impact. And the long-term impact overall. I mean, I wouldn't doubt that there is some effect to that as far as distancing protocols and things that will continue. But a lot of interesting things going on in the country right now. And really interesting things with the economy. How is the recovery happening for you? So I'd love to hear comments. Comment even after the fact here, after the live video, you name it. Do you feel like your industry is recovering, or how do you feel like you're able to connect on that? We're obviously not out of the woods yet, and so it's always interesting to kind of explore this idea and see where companies are going and what's happening. So I'd love to hear some perspective on that front. Excellent. All right. Well, aside from that, let's get into some recommendations of the week, and we'll kind of wrap her up. Short and sweet when I'm by myself, or short-ish and sweet when I'm by myself. Recommendations of the week. So right now I'm reading a book. This is the book recommendation called Powerful. Let me get the details on it. I should have looked these up earlier. Just a second. It's by Patty McCord, who is one of the kind of founding team, more or less, of Netflix. The book called Powerful, and it's about Powerful, building a culture of freedom. I gotta click to actually read the whole thing. Building a culture of freedom and responsibility. A fantastic read if you're really trying to look at empowering a team and to thinking more heavily about culture. I think it's something that not enough companies think about. Big companies tend to think about it a little bit more because they've got the resources and the number of people that it is a community regardless, and they got the resources to kind of focus and think about it. But even small companies definitely should think about culture a lot more often. Great book. She gets into how Netflix has built their culture. And if you've ever seen the Netflix culture deck, which is like a slideshow presentation that went kind of viral, and they have it on their website. If you go to netflix.com, you can find like their culture information because it's continually updated now. So I think it's no longer like a deck to download always, but a few pages on their site that kind of dives in to their culture, their core values and principles, and defining, as I talked about this today, defining who you are, and utilizing that, in your hiring processes and and really keeping to it, holding each other accountable and everything else. Great book. Really enjoying it. Not completed with it yet, but enough so that I can recommend it. And it's definitely worth taking the time to explore your own culture and recognize the power of things like principles to guide. Because principles are great in that they can be universal guides. You don't have to give an answer to every question. You can give a principle that a team member could utilize to answer the question for themselves, empowering them to do so. There's many examples of that especially when you read into their stuff and the culture deck. They break down the principles, so they're not just like, here's we believe in integrity and that's it. Like, no, they break it down what it means, understanding how that is lived in the workplace. Really good stuff if you ever look at the culture deck. But this book really dives into kind of exploring management there and culture in general. So highly recommend it. Powerful, Building a Culture of Freedom and Responsibility by Patty McCord. Great book, enjoying that. And aside from that, let me just check here if we've got any comments or questions. Right now we're looking a little quiet. So it is going to be a quiet day, and I am going to escape as it is Friday, ready to rock and roll for the weekend. I hope everybody stays safe, has a great weekend. If you do have any questions, comments, or anything else, especially even questions you'd like us to tackle in the future, challenges that you might be facing, love to hear them. Feel free to comment, shoot us a message, what have you, and we will definitely keep the channels open and keep connecting. And aside from that, for My Business World Live, I am Billy Bush, signing off.